This is your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning in the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. The one and only Dan Wolkenstein is finally back from his trip, feels like around the world, but he essentially just did a big circle. He went from California to Florida and then decided to take planes, trains, and automobiles all around America to finally return a little over a week, which felt like a month in the big picture of things, considering the fact that we went through the NFL Combine, we've on the brink of free agency, and Dan decides, yeah, this is finally when I am going to return from my luxury vacation, good time with the family. So if you haven't seen Chargers Unleashed for a while, everybody knows who to point a finger at because it's all Wolkenstein's fault, of course. But we have a hell of a show for you to come back to because, yes, NFL Combine's in the books. Free agency is on the brink, literally days away from fully going frenzy mode. But Dan Wolkenstein, before we get into who our special guest is, I will not be the asshole. I actually care about your vacation and your time because I know where you were at and I know what you were doing. Please tell me how everything was.
Everything was fantastic. The vacation was great, well needed, but happy to be home. And now that we're home, boy, am I ready to go into all things draft and free agency because I kind of missed it. Not gonna lie. And
get in the mode, Wolkenstein. Let's go.
But this is the way to do it with a special guest episode right off the rip. So, Jake, without further ado, let's pay the bills, talk about our friends, and then our friend of the show.
What a tease. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. You think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every single week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of up to $200K. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
From Bootleg Football Podcasts, as well as the Film Room, you see a bunch of work he's done on Chargers as well as other teams throughout the NFL. One of the greats in the NFL draft and NFL media, Mr. Brett Kollman, friend of the show, joins us again to talk all things Los Angeles Chargers, NFL free agency frenzy, NFL draft, kind of state of the union for this Chargers team and what to expect this upcoming NFL draft. Jake, this is a good one. Perfect timing. Can't wait to bring in Brett Kollman on Chargers Unleashed. We are very excited today. Very special guest and friend of the show from the Film Room, also co-host of Bootleg Football, Mr. Brett Kollman joins us here on Chargers Unleashed. Brett, thanks for hopping on. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I had a productive week at Combine. I was, hanging out with all the people with Chargers media that were there. I did make a mistake, though, I'll confess. I interviewed as many Michigan players as I could. And I was trying to ask them for Ben Herbert stories so the Chargers could post on their social media without realizing that I was wearing Tampa Bay Bucks gear the entire time. And, and they couldn't.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I have a whole bunch of useless Ben Herbert stories.
Damn it.
Of just me wearing Bucks gear. But
they're useful.
He's great. They're useful here. No, he's great. He's good at what he does.
I love that. As I said before you came on here, Brett, the work that you did at the Combine was just absolutely insane. When you told me what your schedule was and now just reliving some of these stories that you were there through in Indy, I know what always pops off with everybody down there in Indianapolis. It's such a fun atmosphere. But again, I'm still surprised that you are vertical at this point after the schedule that you've been on over the last few weeks. It's absolutely incredible, and we're very grateful to have you on. Come on, and talk a little bit of NFL drafts, more centralized with the Chargers, but we want to start with the Combine because the class this year, as it relates to certain positions, is just so incredibly deep. What was just the general buzz before we really get into spotlighting certain players? What was the general buzz of, let's just say, certain classes that everybody was on board with, whether it was defensive line, running back, whatever it may be? What was the one that you kind of heard, under the table that everybody was really talking about?
Interior defensive line in particular is extraordinarily strong. It's the strongest I've seen in a long time. Edge is also strong, but it's not. I think if I had to pick between IDL and edge, IDL is stronger for me, like no question. I came into the combine thinking that offensive tackle was going to be just fine. And I left the combine thinking offensive tackle is absolutely not fine. And it's probably good they took alt last year because they were not going to get a tackle this year. Meanwhile, interior offensive line, way stronger than I thought, primarily because there's a lot of tackles that I think are going to end up at guard. So it's a good year to need a guard or a center or both in a lot of cases, which, suits the Chargers' needs. I would say it's not a good year to get a number one receiver. It's an excellent year to get like a number 2 or a number 3, which is not necessarily great news for the Chargers, but considering the style of offense they run, they can make it work. Tight end, I think, is really strong at the top and then drops off a cliff, but those top, 4 to 5 guys are really, really good. Let's see what else. Quarterback, Cam Ward, and that's about it as far as like hoping to get a high-end starter. I think there's a bunch of really, really good long-term backups in the NFL, like guys that are going to play a long time, but not necessarily as starters, whether you're looking at Kyle McCord. I don't know if I'd put that much faith in Will Howard right now. Milroe down the line, maybe. Shuck down the line, maybe. El Shador might end up as a backup, not going to lie. But I think overall you look at this class, and there's not a whole lot of blue chip talent, but there's a lot of really good talent. So pick 10 to like pick 60. There's not a huge difference in the grade for me.
Now, I'm curious when you say it's a strong class for interior defensive line and for edge. I think running back is also in that same kind of mold. Mm-hmm. When you say strong, are they strong top end or mid round or both?
All the way through, and running back is another good example where it's like, okay, yeah, you have the stars, like the true stars at the top with Genty and Amari and Hampton, but you're going to get a Bashal Tootin late day 2, early day 3. And I think he's going to be a really good player. Jordan James from Oregon, you're getting on day 3. RJ Harvey, I think, is probably going to go day 2, and he's a really, really good running back. Like he could be a number 2 anywhere in the NFL, like right now. And if you need him to be a number 1, I think he could do that too. So it's not just the fact there's star power, there's also depth. Same thing with interior defensive line. Like, yeah, there is star power at the top, but you can get into the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and you're going to get immediate high-end starters, like a Derek Harmon, a CJ West. Like it goes on and on and on. And then you have a whole bunch of like freaky upside guys that are going to like lead off day 3 that could very well end up being long-term starters in their own right, like Jordan Phillips from Maryland. So it's not just about the top end; it's a wide middle as well.
I wanted to get in on that because you kind of briefly touched on it there. You got guys that were on Feldman's freaks list. You got guys who are much more of the traditional run-clogging defensive linemen, and then guys that are coming in that could absolutely get after the quarterback if need be. In general, as it relates to how you see what the Chargers currently have, still free agents pending with Poona Ford, Tahir Tart, Morgan Fox. What do you think that they really need as it relates to what Jesse Minter wants to do on their defense?
So I have their depth chart up right now because I was trying to refresh my memory of who exactly they have right now and who I think they're still going to have this coming season, which are
the first part of that's pretty light.
Yeah, like there's a lot of turnover, which we kind of expect from a quote unquote new regime. Like there's always a 1 to 2 year turnover, especially when we talk about Harbaugh. Like he's always been a slash and burn type of guy when he takes over a program. And right now you have good players, but you don't have a take over the game type player unless you count Khalil Mack, who may or may not even come back, right? So like Morgan Fox, he's like your classic 4-eye that we're going to play in base defense, and he's going to be our 4-eye. Do I expect him to also rush off the edge? No. Do I expect him to be like a great interior pass rusher consistently? No. Like Poona and Otito, run stopping interior defensive linemen. They're going to be really solid for us on early downs. Do I expect them to give us really much at all on late downs? Probably not. You're going to get your pass rush from your linebackers. You're going to get your pass rush from Khalil if he comes back, or Derwin, or whoever. Like, they create pass rush through pressures and simulated pressures because they can't just really rush with 4, at least not with the roster as presently constituted, right? So I don't necessarily expect that to change a whole lot later this month unless they pull off a trade for Trey Hendrickson. And even then, like, that's going to depend on how much they're willing to pay him. I have to imagine it's going to take a pretty substantial signing bonus or do the Eagles thing and pay him in a crazy option bonus and throw void years on the back end to spread it out. Like, you're going to have to get to a 33, 34 a year number one way or another. Whether there's an out after 2 years, we'll see, but you're going to have to get up there for Trey Hendrickson. If you're not willing to do that because you want to spend on something else, now you're going into the offseason thinking, okay, we want to be able to rush with 4. We don't want to have to blitz or simulated pressure our way into getting to the quarterback. How do we do that if we're not getting Trey Hendrickson? And it's using a first-round pick on a pass rusher. And I don't even particularly care which one. I don't care what spot they play. Interior, edge, like, I don't care. Best pass rusher on the board, get them. Because if they don't do that, and let's say Khalil retires, they're screwed. Like, they need one, like, desperately. So they need to honestly get clarity from Khalil as soon as possible, which I don't think they have it yet.
No, but the latest is I believe that he's not retiring and he wants to explore free agency, but most people think that he would come back.
Because if you're doing one more year, unless you're getting a deal from Buffalo and you think you can go ring chasing in Buffalo, you're going to uproot your family for 1 year, right? So,
and he's not that. I don't see him as that type of guy, to be honest.
Yeah. So if he comes back, I imagine it's here, but you still need another guy because, okay, we get 1 year Khalil Mack. What about the other 10 years after that? So it's like, I think Donovan Ezraku is in play. I mean, if he falls to their pick, he's absolutely in play, but I think he'd even be in play for like a slight little trade up. I look at, let's see, who, like maybe Derek Harmon, I think would in play if they want somebody who's a little bit, more flexible in the interior. Like, he can play the Morgan Fox role, but better, in my opinion, and give you more as a pass rusher on the inside. I think the Shamars are going to be long, or really the Texas A&M kids are going to be gone. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure James Pierce fits the Chargers and what they like.
Well, so that's what I kind of wanted to kind of take a step back for a second and just assess kind of Harbaugh's Chargers, I think.
Yeah. Because
it's a very different thing than we saw previously with previous regimes under Harbaugh or Ortiz than it was Telesco, Braden Staley, or before. So the team goes 11-6, bounce in the playoffs. Everybody's questioning Justin Herbert, and everyone gets that narrative. It's all good. Let them go crazy. Whatever.
I can't believe we're still doing this.
I know we're not doing that. We are not doing that on this show. But going into the offseason, like, from your perspective, given all of the holes that they now have in free agency, they've gotten rid of Joey Bosa. Like, what are the big rocks in terms of the things that they must do this offseason? They've already got Elijah Molden, which I think is huge. But what are the big musts for this team, regardless of free agency or the draft? And then how do you see them doing that strategically? Because A, they have a ton of money, but also they have a GM who's very well-versed in keeping picks, comp pick formula, and looking for that surplus value. So A, what do they need? And B, like, how do you see the avenues going to get those?
I would say you look at the Eagles as the ultimate representation of what a Harbaugh team should be. Build through the trenches. Like, yes, Jalen Hurts is a highly paid quarterback, and they do have skill positions on the outside. They won the Super Bowl by running over everybody, literally and figuratively, and being able to get after the passer with 4 guys and have waves and waves and waves. And yes, they did have back end talent. Zach Bond was a all-pro linebacker, and they had 2 young secondary. Like, I get it. But it's not like the Chargers don't have good linebacker play and good young secondary pieces as well. What they don't have is the Eagles' defensive line. What they don't have is the Eagles' interior offensive line. And they beat the absolute tar out of the Chiefs because they had those two things, particularly on the defensive line. So I think like that's the model. And I think Harbaugh obviously looks at them as like, okay, well, that's what I always do. Like, that's how I build my team. They're just further along in the process, but they want to get to that. They want to build these waves of pass rushers. They want to build a bully on the ground. And this is the class to do it. Like, this is honestly the class to do it. I think interior offensive line, like I said, day 2, early day 3, you're going to get starters. And even if they want to go day 1, like Gray Zabel, like, oh my God, Gray Zabel is like the dream pick for me. Because it's okay, you want to play center, you want to play guard, left or right, fine. Like, just get your best 5 out there because he can do any of the interior 3. And even if, like, God forbid, Rashawn gets hurt, you can kick him out to left tackle. He can do that too. So, like, if you want to fix the offense, you fix the offensive line. If you want to fix the defense, or rather improve the defense, fix is a strong word for one of the best units in the NFL. But if you want to improve the defense, you invest in the trenches. Like, every single pick, round 1 to round 4, should be offensive line and defensive line. I almost don't care about anything else.
Interesting.
And try to augment receiver and tight end in free agency. I know it's slim pickings, but like, I trust them to do it.
Well, wide receiver, there's a ton.
Yeah.
In free agency.
And I mean, you're not going to get a number 1, right? Unless T is magically available. Which maybe
it's basically what T, DK, and Devontae are probably, or Chris Godwin is probably the 4.
And you could sell me on trading for DK, right? But you're going to have to compete with the Patriots.
True.
So good luck outbidding a even more desperate team for a number 1, because like the Patriots wish they had Ladd McConkey. So like they're willing to pay whatever, I think, to get DK. I'm not sure the Chargers will go that far. But even then, if this offense is functioning like it's supposed to, which is they're running the absolute crap out of the ball and they're throwing 24, 25 times a game and they're getting the tight ends involved and the backs involved and Ladd's getting his 8 targets. Like, again, would they love to have a dominant number 1 outside? Yes. Do they necessarily need it? Not as much as interior offensive line and defensive line.
My next question to you, and I want to piggyback off of what you said in terms of investing in the trenches, because I haven't forgotten. I know Dan hasn't forgotten that almost exactly a year ago, maybe it was 3 weeks before the draft when you last came on here, you were the one pounding the table, making the case that the Chargers were selecting Joe Alt with
and you got
number 5 overall. But the fact that I bring this up is that you put so much context behind it, Brett, because hell, I was even one that was arguing the point and just trying to justify it given the value. And again, you put on the Harbaugh hat, and that's what we really all should have done in retrospect. And it was more so from the standpoint to say, look, it doesn't matter if Trey Pipkins is going to be there, even at that price tag, even for whatever the play is, they're going to kick him inside the guard, and that's going to be the pick that's going to ultimately end up doing wonders for the Chargers, and it did. So now you see it with potentially 3 slots open, however you want to flex Zion Johnson, whether or not he's going to be your center moving forward, whether you're going to keep him at left guard. But you talk about Gray Zabel at 22, which I think is a fantastic possibility for the Chargers. I know a lot of people were a little perplexed at Tyler Booker's athletic testing, even though that's just never been his game, and he just plays in a box, and the combine's just not made for a player of his status like that. But in terms of just the interior offensive line, you mentioned it as a possibility for the first round, but who are some other guys beyond that people should be keeping an eye on, whether it's at the center or the guard position?
So I have my list opened up right here. Obviously, Gray Zabel is like top for me for interior guys. Tate Ratledge, I would look at as well. Experienced guy, more athletic than Booker. So, he's another guy who I think in this type of offense, people think, oh, it's a Greg Roman offense. They're just going to line up and mash you. Like, yeah, sure. Like, they're going to line up and mash you, but they also need mobility from their guards. Like, they pull them out into space. Like, they pull their guards a lot, whether they're running power, whether they're running counter, G lead. Like, you need guards that can move. So, could they take Tyler Booker? Sure. Would he open up their offense, or rather open up their run game as much as Zabel or Tate Ratledge would? No. Or Jared Wilson? No. I go down the board. I would say Jonah Monheim from USC, Jake Majors from Texas, like early day 3 considerations at center. There's Dylan Fairchild. God, I just keep listing off all these freaking Georgia guys. I look at there was a tackle from Arizona. Hold on, I want to get his name correct because I don't want to mess it up. It's Jonah Savainea, who I was not familiar with him before he got to the combine because I just hadn't got to him yet.
Great testing week.
6'5", 335. He's built like a tackle, or dimensions of a tackle. But I was watching him, and he was another one of these guys where I'm like, but if he played guard, he's a Pro Bowl guard. Like, the way he moved was not normal for somebody who is as big as, like, and his feet are massive. He's wearing snowshoes, but he's so coordinated and so balanced. And it was almost like uncanny. I'm like, somebody who's shaped like a huge boulder shouldn't be that nimble on his feet, let alone at 335. Like, I was really blown away by his movement skills. Again, I think he's just on that alone, I'm like, that's probably like a 3rd round pick. But that 3rd round pick could be like Brandon Brooks type of guard for me. Like, can he play tackle? Sure. Yeah. But would I rather have an offensive line of Rashawn Slater, Jonas Savainea at left guard, Gray Zabel at center or right guard, and then we figure out the 5th spot, and then you got Joe Alt at right? Like, that's a Super Bowl winning offensive line right there, folks. Okay. So, like, yeah, having receivers awesome. It's more awesome to be able to run the ball 35 times a game and impose your will on somebody and make it so that the game isn't even close to begin with. That's the Eagles formula.
So I think, and I can already tell, there's probably Chargers fans just going ballistic right now at the thought of not getting a wide receiver or not getting a running back.
Well, can I just go on a little rant here? And I don't
by all means.
I was going to give you the floor of the
by all means
explain, like, rationalize, or give us the 2024 Joe Alt, Brett Kollman talk of this year and how you can reconcile, because clearly if you watch the Houston Texans game in the playoffs, they don't have a pass catcher outside of Ladd, and their running game was atrocious. Now you can blame running backs, you can blame offensive line, obviously.
Sure.
But they clearly don't have pass catchers outside of Ladd. So how do you reconcile the need to fix offensive line, defensive line the first four rounds, but also nobody can run or catch?
Yes, it would have helped to have another receiver against the Texans. The Texans' front 4 is amazing, and their secondary is amazing.
Yep.
And if you only have Ladd at receiver, like, yeah, that's a problem. But it's an even bigger problem if the quarterback has no time. Like, absolutely no time. And the dirty little secret when people talk about, oh, we got to get an ass kicker outside, which there are some guys who are going to be available at their pick, by the way. Like, Jaden Higgins is going to be available, and I think he could be that. Like, if you really want to go receiver, sure, you could talk me into a Jaden Higgins pick. Absolutely. But the dirty little secret when it comes to these, like, prototypical X receivers is that most NFL defenses, on average, play man coverage about 25% of the time. 75% of all coverages are going to be zone coverages. And the most predominant one is going to be cover 3. And then, you're seeing a whole bunch of teams run quarters, quarter, half, a little bit of cover 2 here and there. But we're talking 25% of all of your throws are going to be man coverage. And against the Chargers in particular, it's going to be even lower. Because the only way to really stop the run, I mean, against a mobile quarterback especially, is not to play cover 1. Like, you're going to be playing cover 3. You're going to be playing quarters, because those structures are more sound against the run, typically, because you're getting more eyes in the backfield that can rally and tackle. And also, if you're going up against a unicorn like Justin Herbert that can take off and run, you don't want to play a whole lot of man coverage because your back is turned and he's going to rip off 20, 30 yards on you, right? So I would say for the Chargers, their specific numbers against cover 1, when all of this is built, is going to be like 18 to 20% per game, right? So we're talking, God, I don't know,
like 6-7
throws, right? And how many of those reps against man coverage are going to be against a true press corner on the outside, even fewer, because a lot of teams don't really have true like press corners line up and beat you up outside. And even if you're facing one of those, like you can run stacks, you can run bunches, you can use motion and back those guys off and make it so they have to play in space, even in man coverage. So we're talking about taking a number one receiver on the outside for a scenario that happens 1 to 3 times a game for like true number one receivers, compared to taking an offensive lineman that's going to impact every single offensive play, run or pass. Yeah, if you have Devontae Adams outside, who, if you're getting that press man look and you have Aaron Rodgers who can give him a little wink and they're going to throw a back shoulder fade and get 12 yards on you 3 times a game, like, yeah, that's awesome. What about the other 60 plays? So I want to get a position that impacts every single play, every single scenario, regardless of the front, regardless of the structure, regardless of the play call. Like, that's why Jim Harbaugh calls offensive linemen weapons, because they are. So, like, I don't understand why people don't get the math on this. If you want to have a successful offense, you get an offensive line. Period. That's it.
And the last question on like the running game, and I think this is one of those like chicken or the egg things. Is it the offensive line interior, or is it the running back? That's the issue. For example, like, should they go offensive line or Omarion Hampton or someone at 22? Like, or is it both?
How I always look at it is offensive line sets the floor, running back sets the ceiling. So you're only going to reach the floor of a stable, good, solid run game if your offensive line can do anything.
I'm writing that down, by the way. Offensive line.
Again, you look at the Eagles as the model. They had that offensive line for a long time, and they were rolling out, DeAndre Swift and Miles Sanders. Their floor was fine. Like, their run game was fine. But it took getting Saquon to raise the ceiling to have one of the great rushing seasons ever. So, like, yeah, they need both, because I think they need an Omarion Hampton type running back, if he's even there, and if they have a plan at interior, to raise the ceiling. But like, the ceiling can only go as high as the floor is, because that ceiling gets built off the floor. So build the floor, get the running back who can raise your ceiling, whether it's a Hampton, whether it's Bashal Tutin, like whoever, right? But I don't know. If there's no foundation, the house isn't going to stand up anyway.
This is why we have Brett Kollman.
It's funny. Right before Dan asked that question, I was actually going to repeat what DJ had said during the broadcast when he was actually highlighting the running back class. It's just, it's one of the best classes top to bottom that we've seen in 20 years. It has both top end talent and it's also deep. And what DJ was saying was how you maximize the running back position is you have to have, as you said, a foundation set to maximize every single snap that a running back is going to take. We saw that a few years ago when Detroit did it with Jahmyr Gibbs, and they were ready for it because they had that offensive line, as opposed to maybe when they took Saquon at the Giants, they weren't fully ready for it in a variety of different ways. Obviously, he was able to, bridge the gap to some respect, but it was a whole different world with the Eagles. So the reason that I asked that in this circumstance, as it relates to the Chargers, I know you mentioned Omarion Hampton, and there's a lot of talented running backs in this class in general. For what they will look for as it relates to a fit, not necessarily prioritize, because if Hampton is there, I definitely think that's high consideration. But to your recommendation, the floor needs to be built before the ceiling. So let's just say the floor gets built. Who would be some of the running backs that you would say, oh yeah, 100%, that's a Harbaugh Roman type guy?
As far as like Harbaugh Roman type guys, it's not necessarily about size. It's about mentality, right? And willingness to deliver and take contact, having contact balance, being able to pass protect. So I look at, Quinshon Judkins just feels like a Greg Roman type running back. RJ Harvey, who I mentioned, has more long speed and juice than Judkins. He's a little bit smaller, but he still runs tough. I would say Caleb Johnson has the requisite size. He's a little bit stiff compared to some of these guys. But as far as like, okay, the train's coming down the tracks, see if you can tackle him. Like Caleb's one of the harder backs to tackle in this class in that regard. And then I'm trying to think who's Trayvon Henderson makes sense as a pass protector. Like, he's a dog in pass protection. So if they're looking for that skill set, and also obviously being super fast helps too. He could be like their Justice Hill almost, kind of, to keep that Ravens analogy going. God, there's you know what? I'm gonna reference my list to make sure I don't forget anybody.
Have you seen, while you're looking it up, have you seen, I was talking to Jake about this yesterday, and this is deep cut, but since he's Corey Kiner, have you seen him?
I saw him at the Combine. I haven't watched his tape yet, but I was really impressed at the Combine. He moved really, really well.
When you're talking about the rattling off things that Jim Harbaugh wants, I was like, check. Day 3. Okay, noted.
I would even, if you watch Taj Brooks yet?
Yes. No, Jake has.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, 5'10", 225, 230, great feet, short area quickness, contact balance. Like, if you need 4 yards, he's going to get you 5. If you need 6 yards, he's going to get you 5. But like, if you just need 5 yards, that's your guy over and over and over again. Really, really solid all around player. He's again going to go on day 3. So if they're fixing that floor first, he could be somebody who, he's not going to raise the ceiling as much as Harvey or Tootin or Omarion, but I still think he could be somebody who could give you a pretty solid ceiling.
So one position that we haven't talked about much in this conversation that I think is kind of criminally underrated for Chargers needs is the cornerback position. And especially when Christian Fulton isn't there, Asante Samuel Jr. is now a free agent. They've got Dean Leonard. They've got now second-year player in Tarheeb Still. And I'm blanking. Who's the outside corner? Cam Hart, excuse me. That's not enough. Just being blunt here. In the draft or free agency, are you finding CB1? Which one are you taking?
So it kind of depends on who's there, right? And, looking at where the Chargers are picking, I don't think Jahdae Barron's going to be there. I'd be surprised if Jahdae Barron is there. But if he is, I'm running that card in, right? Because that's a number 1 corner in the NFL. He'd also be an elite nickel. Like, that dude's a
Swiss
monster.
Army knife.
Oh my God. And he models his game after Trent McDuffie because they share coaches.
Because of course he does.
And like, oh my God, he's so good. He's so good. Will Johnson is kind of an odd case because like he has this history of great production, but we haven't got any testing number. Like, he didn't test at Michigan's Pro Day either. So that kind of worries me a little bit. I don't know why he didn't test, and like, I don't know if he's still coming back from the injury or what, but maybe he'll hold a private pro day. I hope he does. Just getting some kind of numbers on him would be great because there was those speed concerns, right? So we'll see if he's available, where the Chargers pick. He might be, and considering his familiarity with the staff, that might make a lot of sense. I look at Savone Revel from East Carolina. Like, he would be like, okay, imagine Cam Hart, but faster. And that's him. So immediate starter on the outside, I think, in my opinion.
6'3".
200 pounds, super smart, super explosive, great ball. Like, oh God, he's so good. The only reason he'd even be there is because he's coming off injury. Benjamin Morrison, Cam Hart's old teammate, might be there, but he's coming off his second hip surgery as like a 22-year-old, which is kind of concerning. So if he falls on draft night, it's because of that. But I think he's a really talented player. Kobe Bryant doesn't necessarily fit their typical size.
But it's LA.
But then, like, he plays like a Harbaugh type guy. Like, he is just a dog, like just an absolute dog. He's so physical. He's so tenacious. I really, really like Kobe Bryant. I think he's going to wind up being a longtime player in the NFL. And then if you're looking specifically for nickel, Elijah Huzzie from North Carolina is one of my favorites. Like, he's so sticky in coverage. Like, he's awesome. Again, he's like 5'9", $195, not the biggest guy, but he's so good.
The Chargers team needs both, though, and that's the thing. Is like they need outside help, and Tarheeb could be the nickel guy. He could be outside, depending on what you want to do. But Elijah Molden's kind of your Swiss Army knife, along with Derwin, obviously. But they're thin, so
yeah, it's another position that you could justify Now, my pie in the sky, the like, oh my God, how is he even available? Like, I can't believe it. Malachi Starks. Like if it came down to Malachi Starks versus Jahdae Barron, I don't know what I would do with myself because
Really?
oh my God, that would be the hardest decision possible
for the Chargers.
Because they're both like they're just difference making players, right? They play different positions, but they are difference making players. They are Pro Bowl players. And
can you imagine a safety group of Alohi Gilman, Elijah Molden, Derwin James, and Malachi Starks? I mean, it's a great problem to have.
Would you ever play anything but nickel? Like, just put Derwin at the nickel every single play? Like, oh my God, it'd be insane. And again, that's not because it's like the biggest need in the world, but he's just such a good player that I wouldn't care.
Well, and Jesse Minter and Steve Clinkscale would have an absolute feast. With
yeah, it would be great. It's again for the Chargers specifically. This class is set up very nicely. There's a couple things that sure they would have liked the positions to be deeper, but for the most part, the decisions they made last year with Alt and then Ladd are setting them up for success this year because of what they need and where the class is strong.
Last position I want to talk to you about as it relates to the draft before we kind of get into the, final days before free agency frenzy really gets off and running. The tight end group, in terms of how it was received at the combine, I think was a little bit torn because you didn't have the top three guys out there testing. You didn't have Warren, you didn't have Loveland, you didn't have Aurora out there. And some guys helped elevate their draft stock. Others, maybe could have had a better showing. In terms of the Chargers and the investment and getting Justin Herbert a tight end that he hasn't had since the days of Hunter Henry, obviously the connections to Colston Loveland, if he was there at 22, has been well documented. Mm-hmm. If it's not that, and they end up going a different position, we've heard Ferguson, we've heard others. Who do you think would be ideal for what it is that Harbaugh would want to run in that type of an offense?
Gunnar Helm, for sure. Late day 2, early day 3 is probably about where he's going to go. I look at somebody who can play a Y, who can play a big slot, tough as nails. He's got size. He's got ball skills, quarterback's best friend type of guy. But I really think his testing day is going to resonate with coaches like this staff. And it's not because he, quote unquote, ran 4.8. It's the reason he ran 4.8, right? When he rolled the absolute shit out of his ankle on that false start. Looked like it didn't affect him at all, right? Just walk back the line. And that's at the beginning of the workout, by the way. Like, all they had done at that point was flexibility, the vert, and the broad. First thing he's doing for the day after that is the 40. And his first attempt, he rolls his ankle, like just really bad sprain. You can see the pictures. It looked like a watermelon, right?
And he gets whistled and has to do it again.
He gets whistled, has to do it again. Goes back to the line, does his 40s, does the entire, skill position drill session. He's out in the blocking sled looking better than basically everybody except Monteval from UCLA. Like, he looked really good in the blocking sled. Looks smooth in the gauntlet. You knew he was in pain, but he was gutting it out. And that kind of toughness, you just can't teach that. You really can't. And I think culturally he would fit with the Chargers so much. And he's the exact kind of player where I think they'd kind of throw out the testing time and just be like, yeah, but like, he probably had to cut his shoe off his foot.
I think a lunch pail guy.
Yeah, total lunch pail guy. I think he fits perfectly, and I think he'd be a great Charger. So
if you're the Chargers and you're Joe Ortiz, and kind of look to the free agency aspect of things now, a lot of money to spend. And obviously they have to resign, and they want to resign a bunch of their own. They got the Rashawn Slater extension coming up, you'd imagine. Hopefully Khalil Mack, probably Poona Ford, maybe Tyre Tart. Who knows? There's a bunch of dudes there. How are you spending that with free agency frenzy starting on Monday? So are you looking for big names? Or are you kind of like going for second, third tier?
I was doing a study recently, me and my research assistant, Nathan, and we were looking at what is the typical roster composition of a Super Bowl winning starting roster, and what is the roster composition of a team that's picking in the top 5. On average, the percentage of homegrown draft picks that are retained on Super Bowl winning starting rosters is about 1.5 starters more than a bottom 5 team, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but that means, sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2 extra starters are guys that you drafted, right? Typically sometime in the last 5 to 7 years. And what that also translates to is if you're acquiring on average more players through free agency, you're spending more money. Because if somebody hits the free agent market, price of the bricks going up. Like you're going to be spending at the top of the market. And that's typically how teams get worse. Is not only are you missing on draft picks that necessitate you to fill gaps in free agency, but you're spending a higher percentage of your cap on those free agents rather than retaining your homegrown talent. So I think the numbers bear that out, which means, yeah, they have $90 million to spend. They can do both, but I'm prioritizing my own guys because I want my percentage of homegrown quality starting talent to be as high as possible. Obviously, they have to play well enough to earn the money, but if it's, they call it a hometown discount. It's not really a hometown discount. It's more so if you are proactive and sign your own guys, you can keep the prices reasonable compared to what they would be on the open market. So, I look at, okay, let's bring Khalil back if we can. If it's a 1-year deal, okay, that could be a pretty expensive 1-year deal because we have $90 million to work with this year. Fine. It'll be off the books by 2026. Cool. I would probably look at like preemptive extensions for Rashawn to get him in line with the top of the tackle market because we have the money to do it. I'm looking at, you could probably do, depending on how much you like Jamari as like your swing everything, you can look at doing kind of a preemptive little sneaky extension at like mid-tier, lower, like whatever a swing tackle makes, you can do that now because I think they'd be totally willing to do that.
With Trey Pipkins at like $9 million.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I think if you're looking at, I don't know if I want to re-sign Zion. You could think about Alohi, depending on what happens, or depending on if they think they're going to attack safety in the draft. You could think about Alohi. You could think about doing a super cheeky early extension for Derwin. Right. And just, okay, let's get your cash flow up because you're the leader of the team. And you're also Derwin frickin' James. Right. So like there's ways that you can take that 90 million and reward your own guys, and it'll pay off down the road because you're going to have probably Derwin James for the next, 5 seasons below top of market value to finish out his prime. Like you don't have to go out there and get Trey Hendrickson. Like you could, it'd be great. I would love that. But like, even if you don't do that, I would just reward your own best players and keep yourself in good cap standing, not just now, but 2026 and 2027 and 2028.
So then in theory, that would also mean focus on like Poona Ford, Tyre Tart from interior.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, I don't know if you consider them core players, but
I mean, they were core last year for sure.
Yeah, they're core last year, right? And so if you consider them to be guys where it's like, if we don't re-sign them, we're going to have to spend more on the open market or spend a valuable draft pick to replace them because they 100%. Play a lot of snaps for us. You extend them, right? And you have 90 million. What are you going to do? Not spend it? Like you might as well spend it on the guys that work, right? That's why I'm bringing up Jamari because it's like, I don't know, Jamari keeps just playing a lot of snaps for us. Like we should probably keep him around at a pretty cheap deal.
For context for everybody, this is a condensed version of this because Brett had tweeted this actually earlier today. He said, if you pay your good players early, you get them for 60% of the top market rate. Other teams should take note. And this was in reference to what the Buffalo Bills did earlier today when they offered a contract extension to Terrell Bernard. And it makes sense. It honestly does. I get what you're saying. And it's actually fascinating when you blow it up like this and when you actually start deconstructing individual rosters this way. I mean, and especially with what you're...
That's like Jamar Chase. Look at T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson.
Look at anything the Bengals do, anything the Cowboys do. I mean, hell, there's also this option, right? Which is, even if you don't spend it all, you're going to roll it over into the next year when you got to pay Dayon. So like you could just start planning for a day on extension by rolling it over, right? And not hurting yourself, because top of the linebacker market's 20 million, which he's probably going to get around there. So, especially if he has a 2025 like he had for 2024. Like, you think he's not going to get 18 to 20 million? He probably will. So might as well start planning for that now, and the Rashawn extension and the Derwin extension. Like, you got 90 million and you got good players. Give the 90 million to your good players.
So let's just say, outside of the internal free agents, if there was one external that the Chargers were to go after, that would, you say that would be a home run, that would be a game changer, regardless of position, what would you think it would be?
Well, I would take this is also predicated on Aaron Rodgers not finding a home, because we know Devontae is going to prefer to play with Aaron. If Aaron can't find a home where he's a starter, I would take a swing on Devontae for like a 1 year, maybe even a 2 year rental, because like he would love to play with Justin Herbert. Like, I think he just wants good quarterback play. And he likes the West Coast. So he's 33. Bring Khalil back, bring Devontae in for like a year on a mercenary deal, because we have the money. That would make it so, okay, we don't have to do receiver early. We can really focus on the trenches in the draft. And like, we know Devontae's a consummate pro and he's still a good player. So like, I would be willing to spend on that. Stephon Diggs is going to depend on medicals. Like, you're going to have to do a physical with him to see if he's even going to be ready. Same thing. Like, I don't know. Amari's older, but I still think Amari, like, you could get him at a pretty reasonable number if you want to bring him in to play outside next to Ladd. He's also great in the room. Chris Godwin, another guy you're going to check on medicals.
Would you be on board with the DK situation if it didn't involve like an immediate extension, or do you think that's
the thing? It's going to, right? And so he's not going to go to the team that isn't going. Like, they're going to make it known ahead of time. Like, here's the number we're going to extend you with, right? And I don't think there's any way the Chargers outbid the Patriots on that. Now, if you really want to trade for a guy who already got paid, you could give the 49ers a call, see what their plans for Ayuk are. But again, it comes back to medicals. You got to get that checked out, right? But like, you could sell me on that.
But to your point, as much as I hate to admit it, because you're too right too often, but the idea of just imagining Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz shelling out 35 million for a receiver, period.
Yeah.
Versus like, if they did prioritize the importance of a receiver, they draft one if they could. But spending that much of a salary cap, like, just goes against what you know of them. And the fan in me, I know.
They just went to the playoffs with Ladd McConkey, rookie Ladd McConkey being your number one. Like, you think they give a shit about receiver? Like, come on now.
That's why, and I think I'm starting to, as much as the eye candy of DK Metcalf sounds nice, like, to me, Devontae Adams would be just fine. It might be half the price.
He would be top of the receiver market's 35. He's not getting 35 million. But if I'm trying to find like a comparable mercenary deal, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is at 13, and I think Devontae is a better player than DeAndre right now. So let's call it the Godwin number at 20, right? Like, that sounds right for a mercy. Like, you're getting 20 million in cash right now.
Yeah. No comp picks given away.
And you get to go play with Justin
pick.
Herbert.
Yeah.
Like, I think you would do it.
Would they?
I don't think Devontae is going to be in the first wave of free agent signings. So I think they're going to see how it plays out. And it's like, if they have the money, I think they would consider it, but I think they would spend on other stuff first.
Okay, Jake, I think we have to ask Brett the question that we asked, and he nailed it last year. You mentioned it with Joe Alt.
Yep, that's where I was going with it.
So put on your Joe Ortiz hat. Hell, if it's Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh hat. And give me a day one and a day two. Take your shot. all things considered, the way the board falls, whatever, who do you predict Chargers take? I know things can change with free agency, but who do you predict as like day one best fit, day two best fit?
I'm going to go with Gray Zabel for day one, just because he can play anything.
That's value 22.
And then day two, what's their pick number on day two again? It's like
55.
55. Boy, that's tough. That's so tough. I'm going to go. How about this? Cop out. Iowa State receiver, whether it's Higgins or Noel, whichever one.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
They both just blew up the combine.
Yeah, I'll go either one. Works for me.
I was actually thinking you're going to go Cam Scatabo, because that would be fun. Day two.
It would be fun. I think Scatabo is going to go lower.
Oh.
I think he'll go like third, fourth round.
Oh, really?
And I think there's going to be a run on running backs before they get to that pick, where they're going to be in kind of like that weird no man's land, right? And it's like there are a lot of running backs in this class, but like late second round, like I think it's going to be a first like 2-3 tiers are going to be gobbled up, and I don't think they're going to want to start that run for the quote unquote third round running backs. So I think they do something else, and I think they're going to be choosing between Iowa State receiver or pass rusher, but all the pass rushers are going to go super early. So again, I don't know if they want to start that run for like the third round pass rushers, whoever that is. So it might end up being where like the one appropriate value that's left with their pick is one of the million day two receivers that are in this class.
There you go. Brett, thank you so much for coming on board. Honestly, this is just the best time to bring you on because you're there plugged in at the combine and you have a pretty good idea as far as what it is that the Chargers need. And you called it last year, as Dan said. Can't thank you enough for setting aside time with your schedule. We know you have so much going on with your own work right now. What is the latest of what you're working on? Because you're always working on great video packages or spotlighting certain players and stories. What is the latest that you're working on these days?
So I'm working on a video right now on the thresholds that like both production wise and measurement wise of, you know, what are the thresholds that you can look to over the last 10 to 15 years for a successful pass rusher, which is very relevant to the Chargers' interests at this point. I'm also working on a video on, this is going to sound so weird, 2006 Bob Sanders. You know, the Colts.
He was vicious in Madden.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm pretty sure they knocked the Chargers out of the playoffs that year. But
thanks.
It's basically all about how their run defense was terrible until he came back for that late season surge. I'm also working on a 2009 Nnamdi Asomugha video. I'm working on a 2009 Revis video. Working on a 2006 LT video. So basically, like all like the mid to late 2000s football that we know and love, I'm hitting all that.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Brett, thank you so much again. Really appreciate you. Would love to have you on anytime. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you for having me. And I also reserve the right that if they don't take a receiver till round 4, I reserve the right to come back on here and say, I told you so.
You can explain to everybody again.
You have that card available, sir. Anytime.
You can find Brett Kollman at Brett Kollman on X, anywhere you find your podcast. Go check out Bootleg Football and the Film Room on YouTube. Brett, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, bud?
Thank you for having me.